Sara, do you think China has taken enough responsibility, not just with the issue of live wet markets, but generally speaking in this crisis? I mean, the evidence is starting to emerge that the coronavirus was known, and there were cases as far back as November. It wasn't really until January that the World Health Organization properly got involved.
Well, I think obviously there's going to be quite a bit of analysis once we all get through the crisis as we're dealing with now and trying to save lives and manage the economy through this incredible difficult period. And it's not just in Australia, of course. This is around everywhere around the rest of the world. But I guess I'm a little bit concerned, Sharri, at the call just to ban wet markets in China, because the last thing we need is for this type of kind of engagement activity to go underground, to become part of the black market. It would be very difficult to then know if something did come out later on. And, heavens above, we don't want to see another incident. But the last thing we want is for that to be pushed underground. So I think obviously there needs to be more regulation. And of course, it's not just China that has wet markets. There are other wet markets in other countries. So we have to think about this from a global perspective. And, this is one of those opportunities for Australia to be engaging on the global stage with the rest of the world as we come through this. How are we going to work together with our neighbours, with our allies, to make sure we can confront these things faster, better and smarter next time round, or to try and eliminate the possibility of them altogether. I was just going to say the article in the Daily Telegraph today that talks about wet markets also makes a really good point about the other looming crisis, and that's superbugs. I know that's bacterial based, but that in itself is a big looming problem, particularly for Western cultures. And I think we really have to start listening to the experts, the scientists, the doctors, and taking their advice about how to deal with these things.
Now, I just want to bring in former Labor MP Michael Danby, who's in Melbourne. Michael, I don't know if you just heard, Sara said that her concern about shutting down wet markets is that they might go underground. But as long as we have wet markets in China, as long as the government allows them to continue, won't we just be dealing with another pandemic before too long?
Well, that's just what happened, Sharri, with the MERS and SARS precedents to this. The World Health Organization's really let the international community down. They should have been much tougher in China, and I think that a lot of people are very disappointed with the WHO's sort of genuflections towards Beijing in the early days of this crisis. I would argue, Sharri, that it's not just the wet markets, it's the system. Here we've got a major international commercial trading partner of all of us who has 2 million Uighur Muslims in concentration camps, who has militarised the South China Sea, who has lied to us in January and February about whether there was human-to-human contact for coronavirus. Now, the problem is, how can we have easy relations with a system that not just in wet markets but in all other areas seems to be a player that's rogue in the international system, but at the same time they're so needed in trade and in industry. So we have a real problem, and we have to be much more realistic about supply chains, about not adulating them as some of the Beijing lobby have been here over the last decade. Much more realistic attitude to China. We can still not get into conflict with them, we can still trade with them, but wet markets, militarisation of the South China Sea, brutalisation of peaceful Tibetans, or concentration camps for Uyghurs. You can't build a Volkswagen plant in Xinjiang, Angela Merkel's discovered, if all of the workers are forced labour of Muslim Uyghurs who are in concentration camps. It can't be done. So, it's a wider problem than the wet markets, but absolutely right. We can't have these diseases spreading all over the world because this is a custom of eating exotic wild animals.
Mark Latham, Michael Danby raises the Beijing lobby, and you've had an issue with that in New South Wales Parliament with the Labor MP Sharri Markson, who eventually this week was forced to resign one of his parliamentary positions. But you know he's backed by Bob Carr, who's still inexplicably powerful in the New South Wales Labor Party, and he still has his position in Parliament. Despite the fact, you know, there have been occasions where it would seem you could question where his agenda lies.
Well, that's right. He's resigned as the assistant president, and you wouldn't be betting good money on his pre-selection chances next time round. But, you know, it's an international issue. There have been blind apologists for China in the system. There have been realists. There have been people who want to wave the sabre at China. We do need realism in the sense that the balancing act between strategic issues and trade with China, to some extent Australia's really wanted to maximise trade and has soft-pedalled on some of the strategic questions about China. I suppose out of this crisis there'll be a reset, not just in the Australian Sino relationship, but right around the world. Every country will be resetting its relationship with China, and if we haven't got sufficient international pressure out of this, for China to be a better international citizen, to at least in its food hygiene standards find those 4 magical words, safe for human consumption, then China will never do the right thing. And the global community would have to respond to that accordingly. But in the first instance, you would expect the WHO, the United Nations, if they work a cracker, to put pressure on China. The United States, of course, Australia can play a role. But we need China to ensure, to give the world a guarantee, we'll never have a pandemic like this ever again coming out of China. Now, they've got the technology and the wealth and the capacity and the totalitarian rule to make sure that happens in practice, and the world must demand that, because we can't go through this a second time.